Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today, Missing Voices, Girls in the Care Economy. We have a really full hour ahead of us, so we'll just get started as folks continue to trickle in. Today's event is organized by the Population Council's Girl Innovation Research and Learning Center, otherwise known as the Girl Center. And we are a global research center that generates, synthesizes, and translates evidence to transform the lives of adolescent girls. Through rigorous research about what works and what doesn't, we aim to better direct limited resources to support evidence-based solutions that improve girls' lives. I'm Karen Austrian and really honored to be serving as the director of the Girl Center. Today's event is in celebration of the International Day of the Girl Child, as well as the International Day of Care and Support, which we just had yesterday. I have the honor of hosting today's webinar, and I'm joined by colleagues and partners that have been leading crucial work to generate policy-relevant research programs and practice in this field. So as a field and a sector, we have been hearing the phrase care economy being more widely used in this development sector over the last few years. And we have seen really exciting investments in programs and policies that are working to improve women's experience in the care economy and leverage those spaces as potential pathways to gender equity. However, with the domain as wide as the care economy, at the Girl Center, we wanted to explore more in depth to see whose voices might be missing from the conversation. Who's active in the care economy, but maybe not likely the focus of current research, programs, or policies. And based on what we know about how adolescent girls are often marginalized or excluded, in particular those girls that are the most vulnerable, the most hidden, we started to explore if that might also be the case vis-a-vis the care economy. And if that's the case, how could we make an argument using data and evidence to see the unique needs and opportunities for adolescent girls in this area? And we see today's conversation as an important step in that journey. So today we'll first hear a presentation from Population Council researchers on recent evidence that explored the impact of care work on adolescents' lives and potential for their futures. Maïmouna, a research fellow at the Council, will share findings from a recent desk review and secondary analysis based on the Council's research. Following the presentation, we will move straight into a panel discussion moderated by Annabel Erulkar, a senior researcher at Population Council. And that panel will feature Shiku Semfuko, a national project officer at the ILO, Edith Murogo, the executive director of the Center for Domestic Training and Development, Winnie Nalima, a social advocate with lived experience in this field, and Amar Nijhawan, a senior project officer at IDRC. Annabel will moderate a panel discussion to explore the challenges adolescent girls face in the care economy and how paid and unpaid care work impacts their education, labor, and gender-related policies. After that, we will have a Q&A session, and so I encourage everyone, both during the presentation and the panel, to share your questions in the chat function, and so we will then facilitate those into the Q&A session. So without further ado, to kick off our program, I pass the floor over to Maïmouna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen, for this introduction. Hello, everyone. Many thanks for taking time to be with us here today. Welcome again to the Girl Center webinar. Slide, please. So some of you might be new to the space, and I'm asking whether you ever heard the expression care economy or care work before. Slide, please. So for the next 30 seconds, I would like you to share directly in the chat the first words that come to your mind when you think about, yes, care economy or care work. You can put this word in the chat as I continue going on through the slides, but I'll wait 10 seconds for you to do that. Slide, please. So there are many definitions of the care economy, but I think the most simple one will be that it consists of both the paid and unpaid services and labor that supports caregiving, both at home and work. So we've been talking about unpaid care work. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, we tend to separate direct acts, such as feeding someone or nursing someone, from the indirect acts, such as cooking or cleaning. And paid care work so includes the same services as in the bottom, but with distribution. So when we think about care workers, we often think about nurses or doctors for direct paid care. And for indirect paid care, we'll talk about domestic workers, for example. Slide, please. So why is it so important to talk about the care economy? Since COVID, there's been a spotlight on taking care of the carers, as we heard many women share their stories of their unpaid work at home increased drastically during the pandemic. This has showed us that there's still a big gap between men and women when it comes to caregiving, with women and girls doing about 3 times more than men. And that's the case in every region of the world. There's no country today that has achieved equal sharing of this work between men and women. So even when we think about places like the US or Europe, caregiving still keeps many women from fully participating in the workforce. So because we know that this issue starts very young, for example, 2/3 of adolescents do more than 3 hours of care work daily. And we know that most of them are girls. But when you hear about care economy and care work, they rarely address the specific needs of adolescents. So that's why we are here today, to fill that gap. Slide, please. So briefly, first in this presentation, we're going to focus on adolescent girls' involvement in paid care work. We're going to focus mainly on domestic workers. And then we will look at unpaid care work and its specific impacts on girls' education. And then we'll do a deep dive on the recent work of the Council. Slide, please. Okay. So when you think about domestic workers, we need to know that children under 18 make 1/4 of the domestic workers workforce globally. So they really are a significant part of domestic workers, but we don't hear much about them. Many of them work under illegal conditions, and the nature of their work is hidden because it happens in the domestic sphere. And generally, they know that they endure long hours, they have little to no rest days, and they don't have many protection either. But when it comes to decision-making processes and representation, because domestic workers, often have minimal representation in this space, that tends to lead to a lack of targeted policies and programs that address their specific needs and challenges. So we'll dive deeper into this topic within the panel discussion, but for now, we're going to move to the next slide, please. We're going to do a deep dive on unpaid care work which we don't hear much about. So we're going to focus especially on the impact of spending time on tasks such as household chores and caregiving, which means, for example, the time an adolescent girl will spend in taking care of younger children of ill family members. So there's some research that has shown that spending time on a lot of chores and caregiving can lead to lower education levels, so they tend to go less to school. But there isn't much data from the global south or the global majority. Recently in India, we found a study that found that a big reason why girls were, for example, less likely to finish secondary school is that by the age they were 12, they already spend more time on chores than boys. And that was one of the biggest explainer of that gap. But we don't really fully understand exactly how these heavy care duties impact the adolescent school attendance and their academic success. So next slide, please. Because that's the heart of what we do here at PEP Council, we decided to analyze some data from a long-term study called the Young Life Survey. So that study followed 2,000 children in Ethiopia, India, Peru, and Vietnam. From the time that they were babies in 2002, the researcher checked in every 4 years and gathering more or less the same information from mostly low-income households that were both in rural and urban areas to be able to reflect the diversity of each country. But because the way they did it, the finding that we're going to discuss after won't be able to be expanded to higher income households. So this data set let us know, for example, how much time kids spend on daily chores, such as fetching water, cooking, cleaning, and caregiving. So for example, helping younger siblings or caring for sick family members at different ages. So we looked at that data from age 8, 12, and 15. And by applying some advanced statistic methods that I won't explore here, we were able to see how, for example, caregiving at age 8 affected their math, their reading, as well as their vocabulary score 4 years later. So this gave us really insight on how these responsibilities in care work impacted their education. Next slide, please. So in this graph, you will see in average the number of hours both boys, that's the ones in green, and then girls, the one in purple, spent on care activities, which is the combination of the time they spend both on household chores and taking care of others. But you see that so what you see here is that in each country, for age 8, 12, and 15, girls tend to spend more time than boys on all these activities. We also see that there's differences across countries. So for example, when you look at the far left and the far right, so India and Ethiopia, we see that the gender gap is more important compared to other countries like Peru in the middle. So we believe that this could be linked, for example, to more gender equal norms or just parents' decisions in attributing who does the care work at home. Next slide, please. So in our analysis, what we did is that we focused on the ages 8 and 12 first to see how this time they spent on care activities at age 8 affected the outcomes for girls by the time they were 12. So in each country, we looked at whether excessive care work, which is defined as spending more than 3 hours per day doing care work, affected the outcomes and predicted, for example, the chances of being in school 4 years later. So unfortunately, we found that it was only in India that more time spent in care at age 8 led to lower chances of attending school at age 12. So we also looked at whether, for example, there were differences in math, reading, and vocabulary, and there was varying effect in each country, but in general, we did see that care work had a negative impact on all academic scores. Next slide, please. So now that we looked after that at the impact of caregiving that they did at age 12 on the outcomes, so 4 years later when they were 15. So earlier that in the first graph, we saw that the caregiving burden tend to increase with age, especially in India and Ethiopia, where the time they spent on care work at 12, the girls that spend more time doing that were less likely to be in school or have higher grades when they were 15. However, when we looked at the learning skills, so we're talking about reading, math, and vocabulary, that effect lessened. So we believe that there are other factors such as school quality of lack of support system that may also be influencing their academic performances. But we would love to hear more from you and if you have any idea on what else might affect this relationship. Last slide, please. Okay. So in conclusion, we see that the time girls spend and dedicate to care work, whether it is paid as domestic workers or unpaid in supporting their families, have a negative impact on their future and can pose a risk to their education. Yet, all the discussions around care economy ignores the experience of those adolescent girls and lead to policies that fail to address their needs. So we believe that this oversight slows progress toward gender equality, and there's more evidence and advocacy that are needed to highlight these girls' experiences to drive the policies that would protect their rights and promote equal opportunities. So I'll stop there and I'll invite you to put any questions you have for me in the chat, and we'll come back to them in the Q&A sessions after the panel discussion. I'm also joined by my two co-authors that are Dr. George Odway from Population Council Kenya and Dr. Erulkar Solar, who is an independent consultant who will be also available to answer any question you might have. So thank you for listening. I'll now pass it over to Annabel. Thanks.
So thank you so much, Maïmouna, for that excellent presentation. Now that we've seen the latest evidence on how the care economy can impact adolescent lives and their futures in diverse settings. I'm going to first make a couple of comments, and then I will introduce our panel and have a panel discussion. I think Maïmouna's presentation really underscores that we have to work more in upstream research and interventions. So we've known for a long time that domestic work burdens really are a hindrance to women, young women and adult women entering the paid labor force. However, through Maïmouna's presentation, we've seen that it also has significant impacts on girls' educational participation and their attainment, performance, and advancement. So I think we really need to start going much earlier, both in our research and our interventions, taking account of these excessive work burdens experienced, especially by the poorest girls in the poorest areas. Secondly, I want to say that based on our research in Ethiopia, I think, and we've done a lot of work on girls' migration and child domestic work in Ethiopia and other settings in sub-Saharan Africa. What we've seen is these excessive work burdens in the home, in your rural area, in the family, can oftentimes really lock you in to a lifelong life in the domestic work sector. So what we find is, especially for the poorest girls from the poorest families, they often have very few years of education or no education whatsoever. They will migrate in the hopes of finding work and supporting themselves and sending money to their poor rural families back home. But when they get to these urban areas, often the only thing they have ever known, and armed with very little in the way of education, is they can only really enter domestic work. And so it really locks them in to kind of a lifelong trajectory of work in this area. Also, unfortunately, our studies in Ethiopia and Tanzania have shown that, unfortunately, domestic work is often a gateway to sex work because of the fact that it is, in many circumstances, modern slavery. It involves excessive hours of work, very low pay or no pay, and exploitation, including sexual exploitation. My last comment is on measurement. I think that we know that we do not measure either paid work or unpaid work in the care economy enough in our research. And I want to just call your attention to one very interesting study that was published recently on reports of the amount of time that's spent by young boys and girls in the agricultural sector. So this is not in the care economy, but this was a study where they measured reports of how many hours young girls and boys spent in agricultural work, and this happened to be in southern Ethiopia. This study took measurements of the reported number of hours, both from the boys and girls themselves and from their parents or caregivers or proxy reports. So they asked the parents, how many hours is your girl or your boy spending in agricultural work? If you compared what the parents reported on the boys, it was very similar. It was actually very accurate. There was no significant difference between what the boys said they did and how many hours the parents said the boys were working. But if you looked at the reports, what the parents reported on the girls' work in the agricultural sector, there was significant difference. Parents in this study underestimated the number of hours that girls themselves reported doing on agricultural work. And I think the findings of that study are very, very instructive, because I think that that really encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about and could kind of interpret from that data that perhaps when we're talking about the care economy, perhaps a lot of girls' work goes unnoticed, undernoticed, underappreciated, and underreported in terms of the sheer hours of girls are devoting to work in both the paid and unpaid care economy. With that, I'm going to ask my panelists to please turn on your cameras so we can see you, and I'm going to introduce our panelists for the panel discussion. So Chiku Semfuko is a national project officer with ILO. She is an expert in labor rights and social protection with 15 years at ILO East Africa. She currently leads efforts to improve domestic workers' conditions, focusing on gender equality, social justice, and GBV. And second, we have Edith Morogo, who is the Executive Director of Center for Domestic Training and Development, CDTD. Edith is a recognized champion on the rights of girls and women in domestic labor, and she focuses on education, skills training, and advocacy for decent livelihoods in Kenya. Winnie Nalima is a social advocate. She's a 21-year-old with a lived experience and drawing on her 7 years experience as a child domestic worker in Nairobi. She is now a champion against child labor, human trafficking, and modern slavery. And finally, Amar Najawan has over a decade experience in feminist policy, gender justice, and economic inequality. She is a senior program officer with IDRC and leads an action research on the care economy inequalities in 15 countries under the Scaling Care Innovations in Africa initiative. So I'm going to start off our discussion really focusing more on the paid domestic work, since a lot of our panelists have a lot of experience and expertise in that area. And I'm going to start with Chiku Samfuko from ILO, based in Tanzania. So Chiku, you have worked for many years on policy issues related to domestic work, both in Tanzania and the region. In your view, what are some of the key policy changes that need to be made to eliminate both illegal child labor and also to improve the situation for young women in domestic work? And if you could also include what you see as some of the barriers to some of those policy changes. Over to you, Chiku, if you could unmute yourself in, please.
Thank you, Annabel. Well, I hope my internet becomes stable. Am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
All right, that's great. Some of the key issues, I think the key policy changes that need to be made to improve or to eliminate child labor is to ensure, first of all, we expand access to education. Okay, we need to expand access to education. In Tanzania, around 28% of the children aged between 5 to 17 are engaged in child labor. And these are mostly because they come from, poverty-stricken areas. But in order to ensure that at least we can accommodate them, we need to give them, sorry? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, should I continue?
Yes.
Okay. So we need to ensure that we give them at least free and compulsory education in order to prevent child labor. But additionally, we also need to have programs that support young women to transition from domestic work to a more formal skilled employment opportunities. We need to also ensure that we have legal protection for domestic workers. We need to enhance their labor rights and recognize that domestic work is work. As we are celebrating, the International Day of Care Work, we need to recognize that domestic work is also care work. I think because of the many dynamics that are within the domestic work sector, it's not regarded as work, and mainly because it's most of the work is done in households. But also we also need to ensure that they get fair wages, they have social protection, they have regulated work hours, which is also a very big challenge in domestic work, specifically women working in the rural sectors, but also in the urban areas. They are requested to work more than 10 to 15 hours sometimes without rest and with very little pay. So in order to ensure the rights, we need also to promote for the ratification of Convention 189. Unfortunately, within my region in East Africa, no country has ratified Convention 189 yet, but there are very strong political will from Kenya and Tanzania, and we are looking at least maybe by this year, 2024, 2025, to have the two countries ratify Convention 189. and this would really, really enhance the domestic workers' labor rights. But moreover, we need to ensure that these workers also get social protection, measures like the cash transfers that are available for vulnerable families. We could look at mechanisms on how we can help to reduce the economic pressures that push the children into the labor market. But also we need to see, to work also with the families, the parents. How are we going to promote, first of all, their understanding that when they take their children into the fields, it's at the end of the day, it's detrimental to the child. So we also need to support the parents to give them at least ways of accessing, work, or providing them with supporting skills that can help them to get money, and so that at least it will stop the parents from taking them to the fields and work. And also we need to support the young women to improve their employment conditions. We need to also work on policy changes that support advocacy, awareness. We need to do a lot of awareness raising efforts. The ILO right now is currently working with tripartite partners to address root causes of child labor, to prevent its occurrence, but also ensure that the girls are protected and provided access to education and training, rather than being forced into this exploitative work, and also to empower them to break the cycle of poverty. And I think it's very important that we need to make sure that girls who have been empowered break the cycle of poverty. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chiku. That was very comprehensive. I appreciate your answer. Why don't we move to Edith from the Center for Domestic Training and Development. So Edith, you established one of the first groundbreaking organizations to support and advocate for domestic workers, including child domestic workers. Can you tell us about the main challenges faced by child domestic workers, and also how your organization addresses those challenges? And also, since you've been in this field for so long, what kind of progress has been made? And I just ask you to just keep your answer to a couple of minutes so we can fit in all the questions we have. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Annabel. I hope you can all hear me. Yes, CDTD has been working in this space for so many years. We are counting 20 years plus, and we have learned a few things, and that is what I'll be attempting to share through my presentations. So child domestic workers in Kenya face a lot of challenges. One of the challenges is exploitation and abuse. There's a lot of abuse in the sector. Children do not have any protection. Kenya has a law protecting child domestic workers, but unfortunately, there's very poor implementation and enforcement of these laws. And so child domestic workers are not even aware of their rights. Again, they face a lot of isolation and social exclusion. As we all know, they work behind closed doors. So this remains a very big challenge for these children to be reached by anyone who may even be interested in helping them. In essence, therefore, they also face missed educational opportunities, because at a time when they are supposed to be in school, they find themselves at the workplace, in people's households working. At the workplace also, they face poor working conditions, health risks, and lack of medical care. And also we find that they face limited opportunities even to talk to anyone, or even to do any form of advocacy. They may not even know whether they have rights or not. And so this becomes a very big problem for them, and as well as social stigma. So CDTD has been working through a 4R approach, where we reach, rescue, rehabilitate, and reintegrate these children so that we can provide shelter for them and related services. We provide access to education, access to legal aid. We provide family support so that households can be able to take care of their children and remove them from exploitative work. And also we have been raising awareness on child labor and abuse and exploitation. In terms of progress in the sector, CDTD has been working with other partners, and I'm happy to say that I think we are on our way to the ratification of ILO Convention C-189. There's a lot of goodwill in government right now for the ratification of this, and there's a lot of work going on with the Ministry of Labor and other partners to be able to see that Kenya ratifies this convention. Then our Employment Act includes domestic workers as employees. So this was also very significant in terms of progress. And also our minimum wage for domestic workers are very well defined. Then recently, we have a recognition of prior learning for domestic workers. This has been a project of ILO. So for once now, domestic workers who have been working for many years now through the recognition of prior learning can get assessed and certified. I am aware that there's a partner who is running a SACCO, a credit and savings SACCO for domestic workers. And I think this is a very, very welcome development where domestic workers can be able to save, borrow, and invest. Again, CDTD has been conducting awareness for the inclusion of the International Domestic Workers Day into the government's calendar. And this has successfully been done. And for the past 2 years, the government of Kenya has honored that day with a national celebration. Finally, I would like to say also that Kenya has a national curriculum for training in home care management that is well integrated through the National Industrial Training Authority. Domestic workers now can take a course in home care management, get certified, and be able to negotiate for better terms and conditions. However, a few things are still remaining, even with all that. And one of the things that is still remaining is that there's very poor enforcement of the labor laws in this country. So that leaves domestic workers to be still very vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. Also,
Yes.
social security and insurance is not very well enforced, so that is also a problem. And we have cultural barriers that demean domestic work and leading to the abuse and exploitation of domestic workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith. And let me turn to Winnie now. Winnie, you have experience of being a young domestic worker. So what do you think is the main thing that communities, including employers, need to understand about the situation of domestic workers? And if you can describe any programs you think that have been particularly effective. And I'm going to remind our panelists to please stick to just a couple of minutes so we have time to get to all of our speakers. Thank you. Over to you.
Hello again. I hope I'm audible enough. Okay, I am a lived experience of a child domestic worker. And through my experience, I've learned that, most community doesn't take those people working as domestic workers seriously. Like, this job is underestimated, and not only in Kenya, but also other nations. And through that, they think that those people working as domestic workers are maybe unlearned, and the only thing they can do is venture into that profession. And I just want to urge the community to take them serious, because without these domestic workers, most of the house chores won't be run fluently. They normally make sure that you have everything you need at the moment, and they work they really take care of their children, their employers' children. So as the community, I want them to understand and know that these are also human beings that need to be understood, taken good care of, and understand their feeling at some point. Because while working, mostly while you are still a young child and you're working, no one takes you serious. They think that you are a grown-up like any other person who will be paid at the end of the month. So every work that you do is like that of a grown-up. No one is there to understand your feelings. No one is there to give you a shoulder to cry on when you need it. So as a community, I just want the employer to understand that every time this child is working, is just like your other kid, and she needs a year to a shoulder to cry on, and also a ear to listen to. Yeah, and I've been working with other organizations. Okay, I've been in different organizations working because I'm an advocate, and one of the organization is Alliance 8.5, 8.7, which is working to eradicate all forms of slavery. That includes forced labor, human trafficking, child labor, and modern slavery. I've learned that through that, if the things that they are working toward get through, we will end all forms of slavery, including child labor. And also, there is this Maisha Safe House Center where girls are taken in, educated, and come out as winners. And I can talk also about tags because I'm a beneficiary of tags. This is one of the organizations that are working with young girls who have gone through the, who have gone through these, who have gone through the different abuses, and it normally helps giving out a counseling session to the girls, empowering them, taking them to schools, and making sure that they have a safe place to call home. Okay, for me personally, like I've been in tags for 3 years, and I have a kid there. They are really taking care of us both. So I think that when I get out of tags, I won't be the same person as the one I came in, like, and I won't go back to the place where I was a few years ago. I've understood that when we have people with pure hearts, we will take in more people who are suffering, and at the end of the day, we will finish this child domestic work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winnie. Let me move to Amar. So IDRC has funded quite a bit of work in the care economy. Thinking of girls and young women in paid domestic work, what do you think are some areas of the sector that we should pay more attention to right now? And what do you think are some of the priorities for donors? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question and inviting me to participate. I've learned so much from your presentation and from the speakers that just went ahead. Also, sorry, my internet isn't that great today. So if there's any issues of hearing me, I know the video might be lagging a bit, just please let me know. So on the first point on what we should be looking at, I can make 2 points, but I think this has been covered a lot by the presentation and the speakers. I think one thing that we understand from our research on care in countries in Africa, but globally, is that it's creating solutions to address inequalities. It's hard to treat paid and unpaid care separately. And it's understandable that women and girls experience very different types of care responsibilities, but it's very, very intertwined. So if an intervention exists to reduce women's unpaid care time, i.e., she's able to put her kids in a daycare center, it frees up a bit of her time in the day, then she's able to enter, education or paid work. It doesn't eliminate the care responsibilities that still exist at home, and they're likely to fall onto an older daughter or a younger girl. And this is something that we see a lot in global and regional care chains. As we know, it's very common for women working as domestic workers to migrate to high income countries. You see that with Kenya, women going to Dubai and UAE. You see that, women in Southeast Asia, especially the Philippines, moving to Canada. And something that we're trying to sort of talk about is that when domestic workers migrate for work, who's left in the communities back home to do the care work? It's often likely the daughters and the young girls in their community. So what does that mean for them? And how do we build, care ecosystems that take into all of these sort of moving parts and considerations? My second point is more about norms and work. So this has kind of been addressed, but we know that it's prevailing sexist and racist social norms basically ascribe care work as women's work. It devalues it. It pushes into a realm of informality, rather than care work being treated as really valuable drivers and engines of our economies and everyday life. And it's also documented that, you know, young women and girls who do domestic work are more likely to do their work if they've seen their moms doing the similar work. So it's a generational kind of issue. And I think that, you know, also a lot of women don't have, you know, the agency or choice to choose different types of work in the same way as been described by folks. And there's many, many barriers to access the formal labor market for women and young girls. And domestic work, like your research has shown, like everybody's seen, is coded by social norms as the option. But I think there is a line between, you know, we don't want to devalue domestic work. We don't want there to be less of it. We just want, like our colleague from the ILO said, solutions to be centered around ensuring the quality of employment, you know, enforcing minimum wages, creating standards and regulations that employers follow, creating better social supports and social protection policies for domestic workers. So in a way, domestic work can be professionalized as a safe career option and also seen as a pathway to ensure that more young girls can step into better and higher paid work if they want to later. But going back to what your presentation showed us, and some of our research shows too, unpaid care responsibilities at home are one of the biggest hindrances for women, young girls, to access education, to access technical vocational training, to access you know, employment education. We did a study a few years ago in Latin America, looking at 7 different countries in Latin America on youth unemployment, and 3/4 of the women who replied said it was care. That's their care responsibilities at home that stopped them from moving into this. So I guess I'm just trying to emphasize the interrelation between paid and unpaid care when we look at solutions. I can also speak to a few priorities now, or I don't know if you want me to do that a bit later. Let me know.
Maybe very, very briefly, because for the rest of the discussion, I'm going to ask the panelists to just give us, so if you can give us 1 or 2 priorities in like 2 sentences, and then I'll do a rapid fire with the other panelists. Please go ahead.
Sounds good. Okay. So donor priorities are what we're working on right now. We did a mapping, and we sort of, our work is sort of scaling solutions that reduce women and girls' unpaid care time in Africa. We did a mapping before this and realized there are a lot of small scale initiatives and pilots in communities that work to reduce women's unpaid care time. And the emphasis needs to be on not reestablishing the wheel, but taking these smaller innovations and turning them into a larger impact. It doesn't necessarily mean making them bigger, but deepening its impacts. And I think this can be applied to girls' rights. I think another thing is that you have to approach this issue intersectionally. I think sometimes in the donor community, we think about care. There's a tendency to focus on childcare and things that can be addressed quite easily. But I think we need to look at beyond this, how do women experience issues in rural contexts, women and girls, which type of interventions work. Like I said, you can have some interventions that reduce women's unpaid care time, but it's going to fall to girls in the household. And norms change is a big piece of this. So funding work that supports norms change interventions, which work well at the household level sometimes, but scaling that into the community and national level becomes an issue. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Amar. Let me turn to Edith again, because we want to leave time for the audience members to submit questions. I'm just going to ask you to react in literally 1-2 sentences. And my question to you, Edith, is, I know you work a lot in paid domestic work, but what can programs such as yours do to address unpaid care work burdens? Just 1 or 2 thoughts.
Yeah, I think the thing that we can do is community advocacy and helping to shift communities' norms around this area. Also empowering girls themselves so that they can be able to make decisions and make the right choices. Also role modeling and leadership programs. And ultimately also ensure that young women in domestic labor can be able to access education and skills training.
Thank you so much, Edith. And now over to you, Winnie. You've given us really real life examples of what it means to be a child domestic worker. Can you give us an example from yourself, your community, your peers about the impact of unpaid work, care work on schooling? And again, I ask you to be brief so we can have time for the audience.
Okay. When young children or young girls are working, it is very hard for them like to concentrate in their school life, because most of the time they sleep late, wake up very early, do the house chores, and now when it comes for their time to study, they are very tired, they can't concentrate on what they are doing, and that lead to their failure in their exam, which will end up which will make them not pass their exams. And when you haven't passed your exams, your future is at stake, and that is the cause of poverty. And another thing, these people, like for us who have gone through domestic work as children, maybe while we were working, there are some things that happen to us. Others are raped, others they are tortured, physical torture, emotional torture, and we become so bitter with life. That makes us bleed on others. Like we cut those people that didn't do us wrong. In future, we get to employ other people and make them suffer the way we suffered because we just want to do revenge, which is not correct. So yeah, that is what I think about it.
Thank you so much, Winnie. And finally to you, Chiku, can you say just a real one or two sentences on what can we do from a policy point of view or a program point of view to raise the visibility of this issue of, unpaid care work and its burden on especially adolescent girls and young women?
Thank you. First of all, I think we need to increase the awareness on unpaid care work. We do talk about it a lot, but I think little measures have been taken into consideration and integrating it into policies. Furthermore, we also need to focus on gender equality and social protection, of course. But also most countries use time surveys, which show that a majority of the women have the bigger burden of household chores. So we need to know how to use these time surveys and how we're going to interpret the results of these time surveys into targeted policies. But also we need to, the ILO really is focusing on investing in care, but not only investing in care, investing in the infrastructure to make it more affordable, to have child care, elder care, and also to make sure that we implement policies and measures like, the cash transfers that are paid family leaves. They help at least to reduce the burden on households. In the East African region, I think we need to have more of this integration into a regional policy, because as long as we are doing it in country levels, sometimes we do not have the results that we want. But if we take it into a more regional perspective, sometimes it's better to have these labor issues worked together, and in order to have a bigger impact. In Tanzania, we have the generation equality, which also calls for policies that recognize economic contribution. So this is one way, but I think there are more we can talk about. Because of the limitation of time, I'd like to end it there.
Thank you so much for those insights. I mean, all the panelists have done a great job. I'd like to turn to some questions from the audience. We have some really very interesting questions from the audience, and this is open to the panel members or to Maïmouna and her colleagues. So one of the questions is, does anyone have reflections on the role of birth order? For example, it's typically the eldest daughter in the household that's assigned the role of caregiver. So from our experiences, do any of the panelists or the researchers have any insights on that issue? I think just speak up, or shall we say it's something for further research? Or have you seen that in your programs? I think Maïmouna, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. This is really interesting. I think in most countries, the data shows that indeed the elder daughter usually is the one that bear the highest burden of care work. Unfortunately, that wasn't taken into account in the Young Lives survey that we did, because they asked all children, irrespective of the order, and we're not able to know which one is at which order. But this is something that we can definitely look into deeper for further analysis. So thank you. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much. I think that's a very good point. Here's another question that's also very interesting. How can technology be used to support domestic workers to improve their access to education and opportunities, as well as challenging social norms? Do any of our panelists or researchers want to
Yes,
respond?
I can, yeah, thank you so much. I think I can comment about that. CDTD has experience of developing a digital solution for placing domestic workers. So about 4 years ago, we started working on a digital solution with a tech company here in Nairobi called Tech Savannah. And this solution, we are still testing it to see how it can help to place and connect trained domestic workers, experienced domestic workers with the market, with employers, so that they can pay them better money. And then in that app also, we have included aspects of protection, whereby if, for example, you face abuse or you are not happy with a certain client, then you are able to report on that. It also has a lot of resources for employers. You realize that employers of domestic workers are not very well supported in any way. For example, they may not know, there are no protocols on how to conduct interviews, how to hire, how to fire, how to relate with your employers. So we have put all that in the digital solution. And then to strengthen our digital solution, we have created home care hubs in the community where domestic workers meet, and then they learn skills on housekeeping, childcare, and all the necessary skills that they may need. We call it Home Care Hub, and it is on Play Store. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith. I think we have time for one last question before we close. And I wanted to ask the panelists if they have any good examples of specific interventions that have been shown to really shift social norms, shift gender norms about unpaid or paid care work.
I can speak to that really briefly. We work with a few really well-tested initiatives, and we're using research to help them scale. One is a project in Rwanda. It's led by the Rwandan Men's Resource Center, and it's called the Bandabero model. And it's a model that has been used in different districts in Rwanda, mostly rural areas, over the last few years, whereby families that are, it starts in the womb. Like families that are expecting a child, they will bring specific community counselors to sit with the expectant father and the expectant mother to talk about what it means to sort of have a child, what these responsibilities look like, so that the knowledge that comes around the, what to expect during pregnancy and how to sort of care for a newborn infant isn't just assumed to be women's knowledge. They bring, young Met fathers together to sort of make sure that they're a part of the child's lifespan over time, which in turn really changes the norms around what work is being done at home. Another project that we have is actually based in South Africa. It's concentrated with the University of Cape Town and a few women's rights organizations in the Western Cape region of South Africa. They're having a project. I love the title of their project. It's called Sharing the Mother Load. And it's also working with low-income Black mothers in a part of the Western Cape, fostering critical conversations between them and their partners. I think what came up in this program is that a lot of these norms conversations just happen with women themselves, but you actually have to bring in the men in your community to have these conversations, and to capture the realities of what mothering looks like, what the mother load feels like, and what it feels in contexts that are not necessarily nuclear families, in contexts where women are experiencing poverty, where the project is using photo voice technology to like make sure that we're capturing this experience in a very sort of 360 kind of way. And they're taking the recommendations from that to the government of the Western Cape to sort of demonstrate that, you know, it's we know on paper the disproportionate care time that women do. There's a lot of time use surveys that have been done nationally, subnationally, regionally, but what does it actually mean in the day-to-day, and how can interventions be tailored to poor women and mothers, and engage men in their community in a safe way? Because gender backlash is a huge factor when it comes to norms change. Like I mentioned earlier in my comments, stuff that happens within the households. There's a lot of programs that we've seen that works in changing dynamics in the households in Africa and in Southeast Asia. But when you try and bring that to the community and to the national level, that's when you start to experience a lot of backlash. So doing it in a very safe, informed, contextually relevant way is extremely important, is what we're learning.
Thank you so much for those great insights. And thank you for this really rich discussion. I think I'm going to hand it over in the interest of time to Karen to kind of summarize and wrap things up. Thank you.
Yeah, hard to summarize such a rich set of discussions over the past hour, but just I think one of the key takeaways for me, and I think Amar, you talked about how all of these things are linked: unpaid care work, paid care work in childhood and adolescence into womanhood. And I think one of the challenges for us and all the work that we're doing is to continue to push ourselves to see how the experience is both linked throughout the life course and throughout the experiences and how they shape one another, but also how the experiences are distinct for different groups. And in different types of care work, as we think about sort of what are the right research questions, what are the right policies, programs, investments, et cetera. So I just want to really thank all of our presenters and panelists, not just for sharing your insights and your work with us today, but for all of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis in this important area. We invite all of you tuning in today to explore the blog post that Maïmouna led. It's available also on our website. And you can take a closer look at some of the evidence that she shared today. We also invite you to subscribe to the quarterly Girl Center newsletter so that you can stay informed of our research in this area and other news and research related to adolescents around the world. I think there are links to all of these resources in the chat. And shortly in the next couple of days or week, we will share a recording from today's webinar and the resources that were shared today as well. So thank you again so much for joining us and for being a really active set of panelists, presenters, audience. And we look forward until next time. Thank you and goodbye to everyone.